So this talk is called What Gets in the Way of Inner Healing. I wanted to do this talk because I've been working in the field of mental health and resilience for over 2 decades. And what led me to that work is my own kind of journey of personal healing after struggle. But I hadn't encountered grief. Grief was something that was unknown to me until 3 years ago when I lost my best friend at a very young age to cancer. Then grief kind of hit me in the face as an unwanted friend that came into my life, but seemed that it was there to stay. A year after that, 18 months after that, I lost my father. And shortly after we lost him, about 10 months ago, as of filming, I lost my younger sister quite suddenly. And I had to confront a different, I had to learn new things about healing. It was almost like I was sitting at the feet of grief. Grief was my teacher. Loss was my teacher. And I noticed a few things about myself. I noticed how easy it was to try to bypass the healing, to bypass the pain. I noticed how often I could feel numb. Numbness would overtake me, and so became very interested in what gets in the way of inner healing. And that's what this talk's going to be about. And obviously, as with the whole website, it's Ilu Nishmas, my sister, Shalamis Bas Ephraim Basalel. She was a person who confronted reality, confronted pain. She confronted that in life, and she confronted it in death. And I'll speak about how she died, which was very inspirational to me and a big life lesson for me in another talk. So before we go into what gets in the way of inner healing, I wanted to speak about what healing actually is. And I went to the kind of Cambridge dictionary of it, and it said there that the healing is the process of becoming well again, especially after a cut or other injury. So it's kind of references physical injury. Underneath that, it said a deeper meaning of healing. And it spoke about developing a sense of personal wholeness that involves physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual aspects of the human experience. So obviously there's something more holistic in that definition. Both have things that we can reflect on. First is this aspect of physical healing. We're all familiar with that. We know what it is to kind of have a cut and then heal. We also know that we can scratch at the scab and get in the way of the healing process. I used to do that as a child a lot, pick my scabs off. It used to drive my mother mad. And we also know that sometimes the body doesn't heal in the way that we'd like it to. So that's true for physical healing, doesn't seem to. And that's true, we're going to talk about for spiritual and psychological healing. What gets in the way of that? Also just wanted to speak about the second definition, which I appreciated, spoke a little bit more deeply about the spiritual psychological aspect of healing. For me, healing is a divine quality. It's something that's innate, that's built into us, that was gifted to us as a divine gift. It goes beyond logic, beyond time. When you've experienced it, it's almost magical. And what it does is it brings us to wholeness. It makes us feel whole again. It makes us touch aspects of ourselves that are whole, in spite of the pain that we feel and the grief that we continue to feel. And it's incredibly important because I think what grief does is it makes you feel brokenhearted. You almost feel there's a part of you that was whole that gets almost broken into so many pieces, and it's difficult to know how to pick those up and glue them back together again. So we're going to talk about. I wanted to speak about, one other point to say is that healing doesn't mean that grief stops, not in my experience. Grief should never stop. We continually, because we're physical beings, trying to work out how to live the rest of our lives without these people who were so important to us. We're trying to work that out, and we just create new life. We're going to talk about that, and new joy. We create new moments, new pathways. I was listening to a talk by a therapist, a trauma therapist called Matthias Baker, and he was speaking about a wonderful book, which is so wonderful that I actually bought it, and I'm going to read you excerpts from it. It's by someone called Jerry Sitzer. It's called A Grace Disguised, How the Soul Grows Through Loss. He's written many books, but I'm going to quote you. I'm going to read passages from this book a bit later in this talk because he writes so beautifully, encapsulates feelings and pain and healing so beautifully. Jerry Sitzer lost his 3 generations. He was in a car, a van, with his wife, his mother, and 4 of his children. And a drunken driver crashed into them head first. And he lost his mother, his wife, and his 3rd child, which was a daughter, was 4 years old. I think she was younger than that. But anyhow, he lost three generations in one go. And Matthias Baker was speaking about how Jerry writes about, it felt to him like there was a garden that him and his wife had where they go out and sit in the garden. And there was this beautiful tree which used to provide shade that they loved sitting under. And at first he couldn't go out into the garden. It was just too traumatic, the memories of sitting under this tree. But in time, he planted flower beds, and he put a bench there, and he kind of built pathways, and he built beauty around the stump. And it was just beautiful in a different way. He didn't have to avoid it. He didn't have to stay away from it. That stump was still there. And he says that it created a warm memory because he appreciated what was new around it. I'm going to say that again. That stump, rather from being like a traumatic memory, went to a cherished memory in time, right? And it took time. This is the healing process. But he said that it created a warm memory because he appreciated what was new around it. He said there were new ways of connecting or weaving our loved ones into our lives. I'm going to say that again. There are new ways of connecting or weaving our loved ones into our lives. And I've seen that very much for me in the healing process, especially with my sister. There's a different way that I'm relating to her because she's not obviously a physical presence for me. She's a different presence for me. But we're having a relationship which is still rich and still deep and still meaningful, which I'm going to speak about in another video. So Samuel Beckett is an Irish novelist, and I often quote him, this quote of his, which is quite well known, where he says, "You're on earth, there's no cure for that. You're on earth, there's no cure for that." And people often chuckle when they hear this quote because it does feel like being on earth is almost like a malady for which we need a cure. You know, it feels that it's a sickness which we need a cure for, and there ain't one, and which really makes us feel stuck. When I first heard that quote, I thought, wow, Beckett's giving the impression that we've almost lost before we've begun. What I always say is that I say to Samuel Beckett, you're wrong. There is a cure for life on earth. There is a cure because we're born with everything we need. We're born with all the resources. We say this in morning davening. Our cults are key. We thank Hashem for giving us all we need in order to live this life. And part of this is this inner aspect to heal. And I'm going to speak about it in a bit of a different way for a moment. Teshuvah. Before Hashem created the world, we know that he created teshuvah, which often, like when you really stop to think about it, it actually fills me up, like with emotion. Because if you think about it, how compassionate and loving it is that he knew what we'd face in this world. He knew the darkness and the difficulty and the challenge and the tragedy that we'd face that would make us travel away from this inner wholeness, the shlemus. It would make us feel broken and make us feel far from God and make us feel lost and make us feel alone and make us feel despairing. So before he even created the world, he created this mechanism of teshuvah, this way that we could return. We could return to ourselves. We could turn to this halak elokam mimal, to this soul, to this place within us which is whole, which is perfect, which is shalem, where God lies. We could return to God, but in returning to God, we're returning to ourselves. It's the same thing. It's the piece of God that's within us, so to speak. And, they say the 7 things God created before he created the world. And the one was Torah, the one was Teshuvah, the one was Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, Gehinnom, the name of Mashiach, the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kisei HaKavod. So they were all things that were absolutely essential. They were almost they were the essential ingredients that this world would be built on, and teshuvah, which is to me the healing process. The act of teshuvah, which we're doing every moment we're alive, is trying to find wholeness, trying to come back to, and when we touch into that wholeness, we touch into God. When we're having a relationship with some deep part of ourselves, which is full of love, which is full of gratitude, and in which God lives. So, but sometimes, when it comes to, by the way, one quote that one of my sons told me when I was speaking about this to him is that it says in Megillah, Hashem doesn't strike Israel unless he has first created the remedy. I was blown away. I love that. Hashem doesn't strike Israel unless he's first created the remedy, which is so perfect to hear right now in terms of, as I'm recording this, there's the war being fought in Israel. You know, that should give us comfort, that should give us hope, that should give us optimism. But sometimes, as we know, and as I was speaking about before, we need support. The body needs support. You know, we break a limb and it doesn't just kind of heal by itself often. We have to have an operation to heal it. And so too, we need outside support and community, which is very important. And I'm not going to talk about that a lot because so many other people have talked about it. I want to talk more about the inner journey of healing, because ultimately, however much support we have, and which is, I cannot say how important that is. I've seen that when there is that community and those friends around a person, it holds the person up, it lifts their spirit, almost gives them opportunity to do the inner healing work. But ultimately, we have to heal ourselves from within, and we have the capacity to do that. So Alex Howard, he's a trauma specialist, and he says that there are 6 strategies that we create, that we kind of utilize in order to prevent us from feeling pain and therefore prevent us from healing. Because as Rumi says, the healing of the pain is in the pain. Rumi says the healing of the pain is in the pain. We have to feel it. We have to feel it, but we don't want to. It feels too much for us. And so there's kind of almost 6 defenses or barriers or strategy or fences that Alex Howard talks about, which I think many people relate to. I for sure relate to them. I'm going to tell you, go through them. The one is avoidance and distraction. See if you're going through grief, if these are familiar to you. It's almost, we avoid, we distract ourselves. You know, I find myself, especially after the loss of my sister, spending a lot more time on my phone, a lot more time busy watching, reading. You know, I couldn't almost sit with myself. Another one is called state changing. By the way, these are true not just for loss. These are also true for just generally. I've come across with people dealing with, you know, kind of past trauma or with any kind of pain that they need to face in their relationships or things that are not going right for them in life. The other one's state changing. We want to change our state, and there are ways that we can almost superficially, not sustainably and deeply, but superficially change our states. And those can be from, you know, there's a continuum from unhealthy means like substance abuse, alcohol abuse, also emotional eating, etc., all the way to doing yoga, going for a run, exercise, which are all great things to do. But when we continually doing them in order to change our state so we don't have to face the pain, there's a consequence of it, which I'll speak about shortly. Analyzing. What we often do is we go into our head and we think a lot. We analyze and think about what we're feeling and why we're feeling what we're feeling, but we don't actually feel it. That's another one you might recognize. Blaming others. We get caught in the narrative of whose fault it is. We can blame ourselves and other people, but we get into that blame game rather than just feel it. Feel the pain, feel the sadness, feel the loss. Another one is we become an empath. We feel other people's pain. It's almost like our skin is paper thin and we just feel everybody's pain rather than feel our own pain. And another one is we somatize the pain. We feel it in the body. You know, there's a famous book, The Body Holds a Score. We feel it in the body, and it also, though, even another step can come out as physical symptoms. We're ill, we're sick, we get migraines, we have problems with our gut. So we somatize the pain. So these defenses ultimately destroy people's lives. For sure, denial, there's wisdom in denial, because there's a way that we almost can't confront the pain all at once, especially when it's a sudden pain, a sudden loss. And I say that lightly because what I've seen is that almost all loss, even when you know it's coming, even when a person's older or when they're ill for long, feels sudden. It feels too sudden because they're not there anymore. They're gone. There's this, you know, we can't touch them. We can't feel them ever. And the permanence of that, of never ever seeing them again, It always feels too sudden. We're never ready for that. We're physical beings, and so we rely on seeing and touching and the sensual experience of the world. So the fact that we can't see a person anymore, we don't have that permanence. Now there's, they're in a world of impermanence, of infinite. We can't relate to that. And so it always feels too sudden. But often, when a person dies traumatically or very young, etc., this is even more the case. So we need these defenses in a way because they can protect and help us, but ultimately they are going to really hurt us, and they can even destroy lives. One of the reasons is we're not there. I don't know if you notice that. I could notice that in myself. When you run from the pain stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. And you're not there. You're not present. You're not connecting with self. We're not connecting with self. We're not able to really connect with others. And again, this is normal in the beginning parts when we're trying to make sense of this loss and adjust, and we're bewildered and it's raw and we're in shock and in disbelief. All of this is normal. But there comes a time when we might realize that we've slipped into a pattern of that. We've slipped into a pattern of being disconnected from self, and time's passing, and that's not changing. And that's something we want to be aware of. Another one is the suffering of not feeling is worse than the pain of feeling. It really is. It might seem like it isn't, but ultimately it is. Because what happens is the pain doesn't go in there and it pops up in different ways. You'll find yourself being very critical. You might find yourself being very manic. You might find yourself not sleeping. You might find yourself being very edgy. There's different ways it's going to show up. Now, again, all of this is normal when we're going through the process of grief, but it comes a time where you realize that you're almost stuck in these patterns and you're not allowing yourself to move forward. So and that's individual for each person to know when the time is right for you to now confront the pain and not run away from it. So before we look at what the solution is, how we confront the pain and actually feel, I want to read you a few quotes from this Jerry Sitzer book because they're very, very powerful. So this is something he writes soon after the accident happened. He says, I realized that something incomprehensible and extraordinary had just happened. And by the way, I think this is true, even if it isn't something as traumatic as Jerry went through. I think when we lose someone, our head's trying to make sense that this is incomprehensible and extraordinary, that this person who is so dear to me, who I've never really known life without them or very little of life, is gone, is like never speak, never conversation. Our mind's trying to grasp that. And he says, by some strange twist of fate or mysterious manifestation of divine providence, I've been suddenly thrust into circumstances I had not chosen and could never have imagined. We don't choose grief and loss. I become the victim of a terrible tragedy. I ransacked my mind for options that would provide a way out of the pain I knew intuitively loomed ahead for me and my family. Right? His mind was desperately trying to find a way to say, how can I get out of this? And he says, in that brief window of time, I exhausted all possibilities except one. I realized that I would have to suffer and adjust. I could not avoid it or escape it. There was no way out but ahead into the abyss. The loss brought about by the accident had changed my life, setting me on a course down which I had to journey, whether I wanted to or not. I was assigned both a tremendous burden and a terrible challenge. I faced the test of my life. One phase of my life had entered, and another, the most difficult, was about to begin. So he talks about then actually having to see, like, how can I stop this, change this, get rid of it, get away from it, and realizing I'm going to have to actually go headlong into the abyss and face it. So this is another thing that he spoke about. He says here, I discovered in the moment, and he's talking about a particular moment when he was kind of almost plunging into darkness, that I had the power to choose the direction of my life, that my life would head, even if the only choice open to me, at least initially, was either to run from the loss or to face it as best as I could. Since I knew that darkness was inevitable and unavoidable, I decided from that point on to walk into the darkness rather than try to outrun it, to let my experience of loss take me on a journey wherever it would lead, and to allow myself to be transformed by my suffering, rather than to think I could somehow avoid it. I chose to turn towards the pain, however faltering, and to yield to the loss, although I had no idea at the time what that would mean. And he spoke about how that happened in both spontaneous and intentional ways, which I've definitely seen true for me. And I'll talk about that in a moment, that sometimes the pain just overwhelmed me, often when I was alone, and it would almost feel like I would break down and fall apart, and it almost felt like it would break me apart, and I would almost cry and scream and talk and plead to God and talk to my sister in ways that almost felt primal, almost felt didn't feel human. They felt almost animalistic, and that would just take me over. And then there were other times I intentionally faced the pain, and I'll talk a little bit about how to do that in a moment. He also speaks about Viktor Frankl, obviously, who people always bring up because he had that ultimate insight of seeing that within the most horrific circumstances, he looked around him and saw people who were accessing a part of them and accessing a sort of freedom of mind in spite of the horrific circumstances around him. And what he says here, they chose to expect a good tomorrow, although there was little promise of one. They chose to love, however hateful the environment in which they lived. And he says, in other words, they refused to yield ultimate power to their captors and circumstances. Let's think about our circumstances here more. Through the world, though the world was horrible to them, they identified with another world, a world inside themselves over which they had some control. They affirmed that they were more than the product of their circumstances. As Frankl observed, these few people tried turning life into an inner triumph, and so they grew spiritually beyond themselves. So there was some internal world that they accessed. We're too scared to access that often because we feel there's so much pain that we don't want to go there. But it's within, when we get underneath the pain, we found the peace, we found the connection, we found the comfort, but we've got to get underneath the pain first. So something else he writes, which is very beautiful, two more short passages I want to share with you. He says, what is true in the body is also true in the soul. The pain of loss is severe because the pleasure of life is so great. It demonstrates the supreme value of what is lost. The screaming pain I feel at the loss of my mother, my wife, and my daughter reflects the pure pleasure I felt in knowing them. I cannot have one without the other, for both show what the soul is capable of feeling, sometimes simultaneously. And I think that's something that most of us have gone through grief do appreciate. You know, that there's almost an equation of how much we love is how much we grieve often. You know, that love is equal to grief, and we don't want to not love. But in order to love, you know, we know that loss is coming in some shape or form. And it's a testament to the person, to what they were able to bring out of us. They were able to bring out such a deep love. And that kind of is turned. Grief is the way we love. Grief to me is not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing, because it's the way that we love a person in a different form who's no longer physically there. It's a continued relationship with the person. So the last thing I wanted to speak about is the denial that I was talking about. He speaks about it here, and he says, denial puts off what should be faced. People in denial refuse to see loss for what it is, something terrible that cannot be reversed. They dodge pain rather than comfort it. But their unwillingness to face pain comes at a price. Ultimately, it diminishes the capacity of their soul to grow bigger in response to pain. And he talks about how he tried, how he bargained, how he did everything to avoid the pain. He kept going through phases of distracting himself, using those defenses. So how do we actually feel the pain? How do we do that? I want to give you a metaphor just so that you understand the process of it. You know, I often think about when a child is not doing well, they're upset, something's going on for them, and they act out, right? They act out and they're intense and they're demanding and they're wanting something for us, and they could be that they're tantruming, it could be that they're withdrawn, but they're acting in a way that feels demanding on us, and we don't want to deal with that. It feels too much for us. So we kind of say, just go away, or go play with your brother, or give them something to distract them. Here, have a treat, anything. We just don't want to deal with it. It's too much for us. It doesn't go away for that child. They might stop acting out, but that's not a good thing. That means they've given up. Or they'll act out more in different ways because they need to be seen. They need to be heard. And part of parenting, and we got a parenting course which speaks about this, is that we need to feel secure enough in ourselves, enough in our well-being. When we're in our well-being, we can handle and contain and not be frightened of our children's upset. We can almost see through the upset to see that they're fine and whole inside. But the same is true of our feelings. What our feelings are doing, feelings are part of an intelligent system, and they have information for us. It's almost like they're a messenger who've come to tell us something, and unless we hear it, they almost get stuck because they haven't been able to deliver it. And once we hear it, they can move through. And it's almost like they move through, and what I've discovered is that there's a little bit of a lessening of intensity the next time because we've almost heard them. It's almost like that child can settle down when you've heard them. And there's a child in us, there's a piece of us that needs to be heard. They say that grief needs to be witnessed. We need to be able to tell our story of grief. And we need to bear witness to our feelings. We need to self-witness them. Oftentimes what I found in grief was that I felt that people couldn't get it or understand my grief. I felt very lonely in grief. And it was almost like I had this expectation that people should get it. And there are people who somehow seem to know what to say, know how to be there for you. But ultimately, we have to be there for ourselves. We've got to be secure in our grief, know that it's valid, and we've got to be there for ourselves. So the ultimate resolution is meeting our pain, meeting our grief within ourselves. So I want to give you a practical exercise that helps you do this. It's one that we teach in our resilience framework at the organization I work in. And it's very powerful. It's powerful for facing feelings, whether you're going through grief or loss or any other kind of pain or anxiety that you're feeling, which we just tend to, as I say, try and deflect. And it helps us reflect and actually sit with the feelings. So I'm going to give you an exercise. So this is what you do. First, you want to identify the feeling. Identify what the feeling is. I feel sad. I feel anxious. I feel fearful. There's a lot of different feelings. I feel angry. There's different feelings that we go through, sometimes a mixture of all of them, but identify what the feeling is and identify where you feel it. I feel it here in my chest. I feel it in my throat. Sometimes there's more than one place. My whole body feels like it's carrying it. It feels heavy. It could be that you're feeling it in your stomach. It's like butterflies are walking around in my stomach. Touch your body, feel where you're feeling it. Then how does it feel? It feels tight. It feels very tight, as if I'm being choked. It feels heavy, as if I'm carrying this huge burden. It feels like butterflies, like I can't settle, like an agitation. So in doing this, we're witnessing it. We're saying to the child, what's going on for you? We're witnessing it. We're getting in touch with it. We're letting it be. And then what you do is you almost welcome it. I mean, it's already in you. You don't have to welcome it into your body. It's already there, but you're almost saying hi, welcoming and acknowledging it, but without judgment. Usually there's a judgment. We don't like it. We don't want to feel you. We're judging ourselves for having it. What's wrong with me? Why can't I move on? Why am I so angry? Why am I so, so irritated? So either judging ourselves, judging the feeling. Now we're meeting it with no judgment, just with curiosity. Curiosity, thinking, how do you feel? Where are you? Okay, what are you? So we're just really welcoming it into the body with no judgment. The next thing we do, and this is a very powerful question, we ask it, why are you feeling so sad? You're not your feeling. You're a person who experiences feelings. So you're talking to a part of you that's feeling sad. You're not sad. People say, I am sad. There's a part of us that's feeling sad. That's so all-encompassing that I can feel as if we're it. We identify. That's part of another problem with not dealing with feelings is we over-identify with them. We feel like they are us. Feelings are an experience we're having. So we say to it, why are you feeling so sad? Just to tell you, I did ask this question of myself in a similar exercise I did one day. It just felt like my entire world, like God had thrown a blanket over me and everything looked gray. Everything that used to look vital and alive and exciting and full of life just looked dulled. There was this deep, deep sadness that just felt like it was just, almost suffocating me. And I asked myself, why are you so sad? Now, in looking for the answer, don't give a head answer. Don't go outwards. Don't go to the circumstance. Don't go to the loss. Don't go to even though of course it's the loss that's making me feel sad. No, you're going somewhere deeper. You're looking for something to come up that you haven't heard before. Something that your soul is going to tell you. some deeper knowledge from what's called your das, from deep wisdom within us. When I asked myself that question, the answer that surprised me that came up, the answer my head wanted to give is because your sister died and she was 6 years younger than you and she suffered and you were supposed to protect her and, that's why you're so sad and you can never see her again and you can't be a sister and you've lost your... Blah, 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 blah. But I wasn't interested in that. I was listening from a deeper place. And what came up is, I'm so sad because I feel lonely. I feel lonely. And that was a surprise to me. I feel lonely. And then I recognized I do feel lonely. I recognized I do because, and part of the reason I realized is because grief can be very alienating and you can feel very lonely, especially because I didn't have another sibling that was going through the loss that I was going through that I could speak to. And because my sister had children, lost a mother, and had a husband who'd lost a wife, and my mother had lost a daughter, the people who were mourning her, I felt that I couldn't talk about my grief to them. It was almost as if I didn't feel I had permission to grieve or talk about it to them because their grief was so much bigger and more important. And so, and my family, it wasn't their sister. So even though they cared and loved me, so I felt very alone, very lonely in my grief. I realized a lot of the sadness was attached to loneliness in that moment. So that question is very powerful, but only once you've felt the grief and welcomed it and are sitting with it, allowing the feeling to be there. Why are you feeling so sad? You ask it. Why are you feeling so angry, so helpless? The next question is, what do you need from me in order to feel better? What do you need from me? And the answer that came up, it's a very deep question, which surprised me again, was love. Love. Sounds almost cliched, but I recognized in that moment that I needed to love me. I needed to nurture me and love me from the inside. I need other people to witness me or acknowledge I was grieving or etc. I needed to love me. Instead of trying to support everybody else and get on with life and, get through and etc., I needed to love me. I needed to nurture me. I needed to parent me almost, I needed to love me from within. And I sat there and almost filled myself up with love, filled that part of myself, just gave them love and reassurance and comfort and it's okay. And you've been through, this is big for you. You have every right to feel these feelings. And I gave myself a lot of love. Anyhow, that was very, very healing. And then afterwards, why this is so helpful is that when you start to feel the inkling of that pain come up again, instead of doing what we usually do, which is deflect it and state change and, somatize and all the things that we spoke about, give it what it needs. Come back and give yourself the love. It becomes much easier to feel the pain, to get in touch with it. So it's almost like the first few steps are much quicker. Anyhow, there are many, many ways to feel the pain. And as I say, sometimes we just feel it. It just comes up spontaneously. And feel it. There's two ways, by the way. If it's done properly, it transforms us, it lifts us, it feels cathartic afterwards. We feel we've landed in a different place. What we also can do is just drown ourselves in pain and self-pity and hurt and loss. And we do that too. That's not the same thing. It's not healing. It's almost just makes us feel more despaired and worse afterwards. So there's a different mechanism. The one's not a healing mechanism. The one is us just kind of drowning in our own pain and despair. The other one feels uplifting. It's almost like we're allowing the feeling to move through us, almost like a tidal wave moves through the ocean, and you're the ocean and this is the wave, and it's moving through you. And it feels like, Rumi talks about how, the guest house. I really advise people to listen to that poem. It talks about inviting all feelings in and how when they come in, they kind of tear your house apart. They just rip it apart and tear it apart. But what they leave is a new delight. They leave a new delight. Where by the time they're gone, there's something new you're seeing. It's like that garden that Jerry Sitzer spoke about. Something new and beautiful is there. Amidst the distraction, there's some new beauty growing. There's some new order growing. We spoke about in a talk with Sherry Mandel, she spoke about moving from chaos to coherence. And that's what I feel the healing process does. It's almost a chaotic feeling within us. It's like we're living in chaos within a hurricane. And we know within the eye of the hurricane is quiet, is peace. It's almost like as the middle of the hurricane goes through, there's almost a weird calm. And that's kind of the process. It's like we're going from chaos to coherence. That's what the healing process does for us. So you'll feel some kind of catharsis afterwards, some kind of moving forward, which doesn't mean it doesn't happen again and again, many times, but it's almost moving you forward. So I wanted to summarize a few points. We said that healing is a natural, innate capacity. You don't have to worry that you don't have the capacity to heal, to become whole, to feel the shlemus. We're never broken, but we feel broken. But ultimately, we always whole. The soul can't be broken. It's just there's a lot of pain that sits on top of the soul, almost that seems to cover the shlemus or the beauty or the perfection of those beautiful feelings we feel when we touch our soul, the deepest part of us. But so you don't have to worry about it because it's already built in, it's already there, this mechanism to heal. The only thing you have to be aware about is the kind of strategies or defenses that we create that get in the way of healing. And as I said, these are necessary sometimes in small doses at certain times, especially after the grief and that raw disbelieving, when our mind's in shock. It can't feel too much. It's too much for it to comprehend. But be aware when those defenses start to set in and prevent you from healing, from feeling and healing. And I wanted to end with a quote, a beautiful quote that for many years I've used, and I actually saw recently that my sister used it too. Not sure she took it from me, but hey, great minds think alike. So the quote says, it's by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says, what lies behind us, all the stuff we've been through, all the difficulties we've been through, and what lies before us, the things that are still to come, are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. On that note, I wish all of us complete refuah of soul, of heart, to each of us individually and to all of Klal Yisrael.